Now to the very latest on the murder of a transgender woman who is a social media influencer.
We're now hearing the 911 calls after she was shot and killed inside a car. Local 10's Jolina Esperto is outside the Broward jail in Fort Lauderdale with the calls and new video.
The 911 calls and surveillance video we got our hands on are truly chilling, and this whole situation is just devastating. A TikTok star and a transgender influencer was violently killed, and Broward deputies arrested her very own boyfriend for it.
I don't like women. I hate everything about them. Those weren't whispered in anger or pulled from a police report. They were said openly, recorded, posted, shared without shame. And the most unsettling part isn't that the words existed, it's that everyone heard them. Because while those statements lived online, there was still someone beside him in real life. Someone who laughed with him, trusted him, defended him. Someone who believed love could soften what anger had hardened. She saw the same clips, she heard the same words, and still, she stayed. That's where the story tightens its grip. When someone tells the world who they are, we tend to believe them. But when their actions contradict their words, affection mixed with jealousy, jokes tangled with threats, it creates confusion. Confusion is dangerous, especially when control is disguised as closeness, and denial feels safer than leaving. In this case, the warning signs weren't hidden. They weren't private. They played out in front of thousands, and yet, nothing stopped what was quietly building. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles if you haven't already, and tell us where you're watching from around the world. This case shook an entire community, far beyond one city. Because the real question isn't what was said, it's this. If the warnings were public, why did no one believe they would become real? Jarrella wasn't known because something tragic happened to her. She was known because people liked her, because she showed up every day as herself, unapologetic and visible. Online, she was a stylist with real skill, someone who knew how to turn hair into confidence. Off camera, she was a young woman shaping a future she believed in. Her audience didn't follow her out of pity or curiosity. They followed her because she made them feel included. She joked. She talked directly to the camera like she was speaking to friends, not strangers. She laughed at herself. She shared small frustrations, wins, and routines that felt familiar to anyone watching. That's why people stayed. And the growth was real. Her following climbed. Her work gained attention. Her name meant something in her space. This wasn't someone stuck or drifting. She was moving forward. Planning, earning, creating. Momentum was on her side. But what made people feel closest to her was also what made them underestimate the risk. When someone shares their life openly, it can feel like nothing truly bad could be happening without us knowing. If something was wrong, wouldn't we see it? Wouldn't she say it plainly? Wouldn't someone step in? That assumption, that visibility equals safety, is one of the most dangerous lies the internet tells us. Because while her audience saw confidence, humor, and affection, they didn't see everything. They didn't see the moments after the camera stopped recording. They didn't hear every argument. They didn't feel the tension in private spaces where no comments section existed. And still, people felt invested. They rooted for her relationship. They defended it. They believed the version of love they were shown, because that's what humans do when they care. This is where the story asks you to pause and reflect. Think about how often we confuse access with understanding. How often we believe closeness through a screen means awareness of real danger. How easy it is to assume someone who looks strong, supported, and successful must also be protected. Jarrella wasn't surviving day to day. She was building something she expected to last, which makes the next question unavoidable. What happens when the danger isn't online, but waiting at home? At first glance, their relationship looked loud, playful, even entertaining. They appeared together often, they joked, they teased. Arguments played out in short clips that were framed as banter, moments meant to feel real, messy, and relatable. To an audience, it didn't register as danger. It registered as personality. But there was a pattern forming. Comments that sounded like jokes carried an edge. Teasing slid into correction. Possessiveness was framed as affection. When he questioned where she was, who she spoke to, or how long she stayed live, it was brushed off as jealousy mixed with love. And jealousy, when packaged with humor, rarely sets off alarms. Some arguments were filmed. Others were hinted at through changes in tone, expression, or sudden silences. Laughter would cut through tension just enough to make it watchable. Humor softened moments that, without a camera, might have felt very different. When something uncomfortable happened, it was often followed by a smile, as if acknowledging the discomfort might make it too real. That's how emotional volatility hides. What the audience saw was movement, loud voices, quick apologies, playful makeups. What they didn't see was the imbalance underneath it all. One person constantly adjusting, one person calming, one person explaining things away, not to the audience, but to herself. This is where people often ask the wrong question. Why didn't she leave? The better question is, why staying can feel easier in moments like these. Hope plays a role. So does familiarity. So does the belief that things can return to how they were during the good moments. Apologies matter. Promises matter. And when the harm isn't constant, when it comes in waves, it's easy to believe the storm has passed for good. None of that makes someone weak. It makes them human. In this relationship, laughter became a shield. It protected uncomfortable moments from being questioned too closely. It kept viewers engaged, and it kept the truth from settling in fully. Even when fear flickered across her face, it was often followed by a joke, a change of subject, or a forced calm. Over time, those moments stopped feeling entertaining and started feeling uneasy. Clips that once earned laughs began to draw concern. Comments shifted. Viewers sensed something was off, even if they couldn't name it, because what looked like content was also conflict. And what felt playful in real time would later take on a weight no one could ignore. What viewers laughed at then would later feel impossible to watch. He didn't hide how he felt. He explained it, repeated it, justified it. In videos he posted himself, he spoke about women with open resentment. He talked about being hurt in the past, about being bullied, about learning early that strength meant striking back. According to him, pain wasn't something to process, it was something to return. He said it didn't matter who crossed the line, man, woman, anyone. If someone put their hands on him, he believed he was entitled to respond with force. That belief didn't appear overnight. He traced it back to childhood stories, to lessons he claimed were taught at home, to moments where fear hardened into anger. And in his mind, those experiences became permission. Permission to react without restraint, permission to excuse harm as self-respect. But beliefs like that don't stay theoretical. They shape how someone moves through relationships. When jealousy surfaced, it wasn't treated as insecurity. It was framed as awareness. When arguments escalated, they weren't seen as warning signs. They were treated as proof that he wouldn't be disrespected. Words like boundaries and accountability were replaced with dominance and retaliation. The line between being hurt and hurting others disappeared. This is where mindset turns dangerous. Because when someone believes violence is always justified if they feel wronged, there's no pause built into that thinking. No space for cooling down. No room for regret. Every disagreement becomes a test. Every challenge becomes a threat. And the consequences don't stay confined to the person holding those beliefs. What made this situation even more volatile was how openly these ideas were shared. They weren't private thoughts. They were broadcast, normalized, sometimes laughed at, sometimes defended. The more they were repeated, the more permanent they became. Not just as opinions, but as identity. Perspective matters here. This isn't about shocking statements for attention. It's about how a belief system, left unchecked, moves closer to real-world harm. When anger becomes a guiding principle and retaliation is seen as strength, outcomes narrow, options disappear, decisions speed up. And when jealousy enters that equation, when fear of loss collides with pride and access, the risk multiplies. Because the question stops being, what does he believe? It becomes this. What happens when jealousy meets access to a weapon? As time went on, the tone of her posts began to change. Not all at once, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. Small marks appeared, scratches she brushed off, comments she laughed through. Injuries explained quickly, casually, before anyone could ask too many questions. Each time, she reassured her audience that she was fine. Each time, people wanted to believe her. There were moments when fear slipped through before she could cover it. A sudden shift in her face, a pause mid-sentence, a glance toward a door. In some clips, her voice tightened when he entered the room. In others, laughter came too fast, like it was meant to smooth something over before it turned into a problem. Friends and followers noticed. Concern showed up in comments. Messages asked if she was safe. Some warned her to leave. Others treated it like messy relationship drama. Intense but temporary. Online, everything moves fast. Yesterday's alarm becomes today's distraction, and she kept coming back. Each time something happened, there was relief afterward. Relief that she was still here. Relief that she could go live again. Relief that she could joke about surviving another argument. That relief became dangerous. It created the sense that if she made it through before, she would make it through again. This is how danger becomes familiar. Flash back through the moments now, and the pattern is clearer than it was in real time. The bruises explained away, the tension laughed off. The way she adjusted her behavior to keep peace. The way he tested limits, then pulled back just enough to reset the cycle. She wasn't hiding what was happening. She just didn't frame it as what it truly was. And when someone is still breathing, still posting, still smiling, it's easy to believe the worst hasn't arrived yet. But survival can create false confidence. Each escape made the next risk feel manageable. Each apology made the harm feel temporary. Each calm moment felt like proof that things could still work. Until the balance tipped. The final shift didn't come with a dramatic announcement or a warning anyone could hear clearly. It came quietly. Through absence, through uncertainty, through time spent away that should have offered safety but didn't guarantee it. Because after everything that had already happened, and then, she left jail. When she was released from jail, there was a sense of relief that spread quickly through her circle and her audience. Relief that she was free. Relief that she could go home. Relief that whatever chaos had surrounded the arrest was finally over. For many watching, it felt like a reset. A chance for things to slow down, to breathe, to stabilize. For her, it was more complicated. Coming back meant vulnerability. Time away doesn't erase tension. It often magnifies it. There were emotions waiting on the other side of that door. Questions left unanswered, resentment that hadn't cooled, expectations hanging in the air. Still, there was hope. Hope that distance had softened things. Hope that the worst moments were behind them. She returned believing that survival meant progress. In the days that followed, there was an effort to move forward as if balance had been restored. Conversations resumed. Normal routines crept back in. The kind of calm that feels earned after turmoil began to settle, not because problems were solved, but because exhaustion demanded quiet. That calm is deceptive. What looked like peace was really pressure being held down. The same emotions that had driven arguments before didn't disappear during her absence. They waited. And when she came back, those feelings returned with added weight. Jealousy mixed with insecurity, control mixed with fear of loss. From the outside, this should have been the moment everything improved. A turning point toward safety, toward distance, toward clarity. Instead, it became the moment the stakes rose. Her return placed her back into a space that had already proven unstable. Familiarity made it feel manageable. Love made it feel worth the risk. And because she had endured so much already, the danger didn't announce itself as new. It felt like something she already knew how to navigate. That's what made it so dangerous. Before we go any further, if you're still watching, comment tap for her. Because stories like this deserve to be remembered, not rushed past. What no one could see in that moment was how thin the calm really was, how quickly it could collapse, how close everything was to breaking. Because the return home didn't mark the end of the tension, it marked the point where it could no longer be contained. That night didn't announce itself as different. There was no dramatic build, no warning that this would be the last time she walked into that space. What unfolded happened behind closed doors, away from an audience that had grown used to seeing their disagreements surface and pass. An argument began, not unusual for them. Voices rose, frustration resurfaced. The same unresolved issues circled back again. Jealousy, control, resentment that had been pressed down for days and now demanded release. These weren't new problems. They were familiar ones, returning with force. Inside that apartment, choices were being made in real time. There were moments where things could have slowed, moments where someone could have stepped away, moments where the argument could have ended the way others had, loud, messy, but survivable. But that didn't happen. The tension didn't break. It tightened. What matters here isn't spectacle. It's the finality of decisions. At some point during that dispute, the conflict crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The argument became irreversible. There was no pause long enough to reset, no space left for apology or retreat. Whatever control had been pretending to exist was gone. She did not walk out. No one intervened. No outside force entered the room in time to change what was unfolding. What happened next ended her life. Not in a public space, not during a viral moment, but in the place where she should have been safest. The aftermath was quiet in the way only final moments are. When authorities arrived, the reality set in quickly. The life people had followed, supported, and believed in was over. There would be no next post, no update explaining what happened, no chance to clarify, laugh it off, or reassure anyone that she was okay. She wasn't. The person she trusted most in that space was taken into custody. The argument that started as another round of tension ended with consequences that could never be undone. Claims would come later. Explanations would be offered. But none of that changed the outcome of that night. A young woman who had built her future in front of thousands was gone. And what makes this moment especially heavy is how preventable it feels in hindsight. Not because the signs were obvious in the moment, but because so many of them existed, scattered across time, waiting to be taken seriously. This wasn't chaos erupting from nowhere. It was a pattern reaching its breaking point. There is a silence that follows something like this. A silence filled with disbelief, regret, and questions that will never be answered directly. The kind of silence where everything slows down, not out of peace, but because there is nowhere left to go. That night closed every door she should have been able to walk through. And once it ended, nothing could bring her back. The shift from private tragedy to public accountability happened quickly. Law enforcement arrived at the apartment and took him into custody. What had been an argument moments earlier was now a crime scene. The person who had once spoken freely online was no longer addressing an audience. He was facing the weight of what had just occurred. Not long after, he began making claims of self-defense. That claim immediately raised questions. According to the information available at the time of his arrest, there was only one firearm involved. There was no indication of a second weapon. No evidence suggesting a mutual exchange of force that would support the version of events he was presenting. The gap between what he said and what the situation showed was hard to ignore. This is where words stop carrying the same power they once did. Online, statements can be framed, justified, repeated until they feel solid. In the legal system, they are tested, examined, matched against physical evidence and timelines that don't bend to personal narratives. What might sound convincing in a video loses strength when it collides with facts. As news spread, the response was immediate. Stylists, creators, followers, people who had watched her build her life in real time, struggled to process what had happened. Clips resurfaced. Moments once brushed off were replayed with new understanding. What had seemed chaotic or dramatic before now carried a much heavier meaning. Grief moved fast, but so did anger. Questions flooded comment sections and group chats. How did this go so far? Why wasn't it stopped? Could someone have stepped in sooner? The same visibility that once made people feel connected now amplified the loss. And in the middle of it all stood a contradiction that could not be explained away. A man who publicly spoke about hate and retaliation, now asking to be believed when claiming he had no choice. The system moved forward, regardless of opinion. Charges were filed. The case entered the legal process. What followed would no longer be shaped by clips or commentary, but by evidence, testimony, and decisions that carry permanent consequences. The story had crossed a line, from something witnessed online to something that would be judged in court. And nothing posted afterward could undo what had already been done. The weight of what happened didn't stop with her. It moved outward, into families, into homes, into lives that would never return to what they were before. Nowhere was that weight more visible than in her father's grief. In a moment that spread quickly online, he spoke openly, overwhelmed by loss. His voice broke as he tried to find words that could hold what he was feeling. He didn't speak like someone prepared for an audience. He spoke like a parent whose world had collapsed without warning. He talked about loss in a way that didn't need explanation, about pain that doesn't pause, about the shock of realizing that his child was gone, not temporarily, not in distance, but forever. The rawness of that moment cut through everything else surrounding the case. This wasn't about opinions or blame. It was about absence. A parent isn't meant to outlive their child, and in his words that truth sat heavily. He described the toll it had taken on him, the fear of what grief was doing to his own body and mind. It was the sound of someone trying to survive something that cannot be fixed. Nothing in that moment felt performative. There was no attempt to shape a narrative or seek sympathy. It was simply pain laid bare, because it had nowhere else to go. This is the part of stories like this that often fades into the background once headlines move on. But it shouldn't, because when a life is taken, it doesn't disappear quietly. It leaves a permanent gap. It alters routines, futures, and identities. It reshapes everyone connected to that person in ways that never fully heal. Her father's grief made one thing unmistakably clear. This loss did not end with her. It continues every day in the lives of those who loved her most. One of the hardest truths in this case is that nothing about it was hidden. So much of what mattered happened in plain view. Arguments were posted, injuries were acknowledged, fear showed up in expressions and tone, even when words tried to soften it, and still, the danger continued to grow. This story challenges a belief many of us carry without realizing it, that being seen means being safe. An online presence can create connection, income, and support. It can also create a false sense of protection. When someone shares their life openly, we assume help will come if it's needed. We assume someone else will step in. We assume visibility equals accountability. It doesn't. Abuse doesn't always operate in secrecy. Sometimes it lives in jokes, in patterns people excuse because they feel familiar, entertaining, or just how they are. When violent language is laughed off. When the noise fades and the arguments stop replaying in our minds, what remains is not the crime, it's her. Jarala was not a headline. She was a young woman with plans still forming, ideas still unfolding, and a future she expected to step into piece by piece. She was creative, ambitious, and present in her own life. She worked towards something. She believed tomorrow was promised enough to plan for it. That's what was taken. Not just a life, but time. Time to grow, time to change, time to walk away safely, time to create more than she already had. The loss isn't only measured by how she died, but by everything she never got the chance to finish. And now, what's left behind is responsibility. Not guilt. Responsibility. Responsibility to stop brushing off violence as humor. Responsibility to question patterns instead of waiting for proof that arrives too late. Responsibility to understand that repeated harm doesn't need to be dramatic to be deadly. It only needs to continue. As viewers, we are witnesses whether we choose to be or not. Watching doesn't make us powerless, but ignoring what we're seeing does. This story reminds us that moments we scroll past, laugh at, or excuse can carry weight far beyond a screen. There are no clean endings in cases like this. There is no version where the loss makes sense. There is only the truth that someone who trusted love to protect her was failed by the very space that should have been safest. Jarala deserved more than survival. She deserved peace. She deserved distance from harm. She deserved the chance to live without having to explain fear away. And while nothing can change what happened, attention still matters. Conversation still matters. Remembering her as a person, not a statistic, still matters. If this story stayed with you, share it, because attention forces conversations people try to avoid. And tell me, do you believe accountability should come before forgiveness, or after?